Chapter 2801. After Lin Cece left, Lan Yu began to call Qin Chun, but the phone rang over and over again, but she didn't answer. Lan Yu casually put on his clothes, walked to the door of the villa, and asked the guard, "How did Dr. Qin come?" The guard said very carefully, "He was sent here by a black limousine. After Dr. Qin came, the car left." Lan Yu scratched his hair and cursed in a low voice. "Damn it!" He narrowed his eyes, went straight back to the villa, took the car key, got in the car, and drove out. It was very late at night. Lan Yu drove and looked for her in the night. With her personality, she probably needed to calm down at this time. She didn't want to see anyone, and she would also be proud to not want anyone to pick her up. Not everyone could see Qin Chen's tears. He just knew that she would cry. Lin Cece's words kept replaying in his mind. For Qin Chun to come so late at night, there was no other reason other than to reconcile. Lan Yu pursed his lips. Apart from being anxious, he was most worried about her safety. He looked for her bit by bit, and finally, 2 hours later, he found her in a suburban park. Qin Chun sat there, smoking quietly. Her smoking posture was more languid and good-looking than a man's. Lan Yu sat in the car and looked at her quietly. She also noticed him. She didn't stop smoking. She just looked at him and had no intention of running away. This was his Qin Chin. After a long time, Lan Yu got out of the car and walked towards her in the night. However, Qin Chun patted the dust on his body and walked forward, as if he didn't exist. Lan Yu frowned. "Chun-chin, I can explain." "No need." Qin Chun turned around and looked at him under the moonlight. "Lan Yu, I wanted to please you and say that we made up, but there's no need." She gave a self-deprecating laugh. "Originally, we were forced to be together, but now it's just right." Lan Yu narrowed his eyes and stared at her. "Do you really think so?" Qin Chun smiled faintly. "Yes." "Lan Yu, you see, we can't trust each other unconditionally. No matter what you and Lin Cece did or didn't do today, in my eyes, it's still a betrayal." Lan Yu's breathing hurt. He stared into her eyes. "Qin Chen, give me another chance." "No more." Qin Chun said very softly, "Once is enough." She took a step back and smiled. "Actually, you can find a normal girl to fall in love with. I've said it before, we can't get along. I can't give you anything. Therefore, it was right to say that they should separate now. As for him, he would probably be sad for a while, but not long after, Li Cece and Wang Cece would appear. A handsome, talented, and rich man would never lack women. She was just his obsession for a while. It would be fine once it was over. Lin Cece's appearance on his bed was the best proof. Qin Chun lowered her eyes and looked at his toes as he took another step forward. She said in a low voice, "Lan Yu, don't come any closer. We're done." "Is that so?" He punched the wall beside him. There was a heavy sound. She almost suspected that he had smashed the bones in his hand. She suppressed the sourness in her heart. "Lan Yu, it's just a breakup. There's no need to do this." There were a few drops of warm blood on her face. That was Lan Yu's blood. Chapter 2802. With that, she turned around and walked into the distance. Her back was straight and she didn't allow herself to look back. "Qin Chen, let's just end it like this. You won't be upset anymore and you won't worry about gains and losses anymore. Uncle Zhao was right. All men liked little vixens, and she wouldn't turn herself into that for some man. She was Qin Chen. She couldn't do it." She walked slowly. Her heart trembled with every step she took. Only then did she realize that feelings could be so hurtful. She thought that her heart wouldn't hurt anymore. It turned out that there was such a heart-wrenching pain in addition to pain. However, she didn't want to stay with such a man. It was meaningless to force it. Behind her, Lan Yu's voice came, "Qin Chen, you don't make trouble because you don't have a heart." Her body paused for a moment and then she walked forward again. But she didn't take a few steps before she was hugged from behind. Qin Chen was shocked and angry. He didn't move but said coldly, "What are you doing?" "Lan Yu?" Her body was turned around. Under the moonlight, she saw his cold, handsome face. Lan Yu said softly, "You want to break up? If you want to break up, then make it clear." We've already made it clear. You and Lin Cece were in bed and almost had no clothes. Lan Yu, how much more clear do you want me to make it? Qin Shun looked at his words and sneered. Or do you think that you haven't completely taken her yet? So you're still innocent? You just took off your clothes and chatted with her? Lan Yu's face was a little embarrassed. After a while, he said hoarsely, She is not important. Lan Yu, there's no need for us to quarrel. She said tiredly, Let me go, otherwise. Otherwise what? Lan Yu's face was a little ugly. He looked at her and said hoarsely, Qin Chen, you should know that my temper isn't that good. Otherwise, nothing much. Qin Chun squeezed out a sentence and began to struggle. Lan Yu knew that she practiced karate, so he directly hugged her, not letting her struggle, not giving her a chance to escape. He almost half-forcefully dragged her into his car and pressed her into the back seat. Qin Chun was lying on his back with Lan Yu on top of him. In the narrow carriage, because of the contact between the man and the woman, the air became warm. Qin Chun raised his leg and wanted to kick him, but he was firmly held down. A man's strength was superior to a woman's, so her moves were completely useless against him. The back of his hand was injured, and the smell of blood was even more obvious in the car. Qin Chun glared at him. Lan Yu, do you want to rape me? If you insist on breaking up, then I don't mind using this method to make you change your mind. His eyes were dark and his voice was unbelievably hoarse. Qin Chun looked at him and said in a very low voice, If you do that, it will be impossible for us to be together again. It will be impossible for us now. Lan Yu's fingers gently stroked her lips. Because his fingers were stained with blood, her lips were dyed even redder. There was also blood at the corner of his mouth, which made him look very extravagant. Qin Chun looked up at him, feeling as if she had never known this man before, and his voice was even lower. If I can have you again now, why wouldn't I do it? Chapter 2803. Qin Chun didn't resist. She just lay there quietly. Lan Yu was very rough. Like a violent storm, he had never been so rough. The fresh blood was like the strongest medicine in the village, burning away all of his rationality. He took her in the most brutal way. Qin Chun was in pain, but she just bit her lip and didn't say anything else. She didn't even cry out in pain, nor did she tell him. After it was over, she lay there for a while before saying softly, Can you let me go now? Lan Yu rolled to the side and sat up, looking at her body in the dark. He knew how rough he was just now, and he also knew that she was in pain. His voice was hoarse. Why didn't you resist? Is it useful? Qin Chun said coldly, then sat up. She looked at her own shirt, then picked up the shirt he had left at the side and put it on. She took out her phone and dialed Yi Muyun's number. Brother, ask the driver to pick me up. I'm at. Before she could finish, the phone was hung up. Lan Yu's face was a little pale. He knew the purpose of the call too well. She didn't want someone to pick her up, but she wanted Yi Muyun to intervene in their relationship and stop him from looking for her again. Did she loathe him to such an extent? When he asked this question unconsciously, he became more clear-headed. Qin Chen's voice was very soft. Yes. Lan Yu let out a long breath, stared at her, and said very slowly, Qin Chun, I really don't have a chance? Yes, you don't. She picked up the phone. Before she opened the car door and got out, she said softly, You can look for Lin Cece. Really? It would have been better if she hadn't said this. But when she said it, Lan Yu was a little angry. He pinched her chin and said in a low voice, Do you really think so? Yes. Qin Chen's voice was very soft, but it was very firm. Lan Yu kept looking at her and suddenly said, Qin Chen, you don't love me. If you loved someone, how could you give up so easily and not care so much? How could he say such a thing? He was wrong. But what hurt him more was that she didn't love him. From the beginning, he knew that Qin Chen was like a mystery. He wanted to solve this mystery himself, but now it seemed that it was not necessary. Lan Yu's voice calmed down. I'll send you back. He paused for a moment before continuing, speaking slowly and deeply. Qin Chen, I don't have any protection today, and you're not in your safe period either. If you don't want to give birth to a child who doesn't love a man, you'd better take the medicine. Also, Don't worry, I won't bother you anymore. As he spoke, his breathing was painful, but he still finished it in one breath. Qin Chun lowered his eyes and pursed his lips. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Okay." Lan Yu stared at her for a long time before climbing to the front to start the car. He opened the car window and blew away the smell inside. However, he smoked. As he drove, he smoked one cigarette after another. When the car stopped, it was at the entrance of a 24-hour pharmacy. Qin Chun looked outside, and for the first time, she revealed a look of vulnerability. She knew that he wanted to buy the medicine personally. Would he feel at ease like this? Lan Yu opened the car door and got out, ignoring the fact that he was naked and that there were some messy scars on his body. He walked into the shop and asked for the morning after medicine. The shop assistant looked at him and sighed in her heart. He really turned hostile the moment he got out of bed. This medicine shouldn't be taken casually. It's not good for women. Lan Yu took the medicine, paid for it, and turned to leave. The shop assistant thought for a moment and took a step forward. He wanted to tell him that the medicine was fake and that their boss was a black-hearted boss. However, the car window rolled down and a man's face appeared. He was wearing a black shirt that was obviously a size too big. The shop assistant muttered, "Why would a man need to take medicine? He can't get pregnant anyway, as long as he doesn't die." Chapter 2804. With that thought in mind, the shop assistant felt much more at ease. Men wouldn't get pregnant anyway. She had never heard of a little tadpole sprouting from there. However, the man sitting in the back seat was really handsome. If it were her, she would also be moved. It was an old woman in her 50s. She held her wrinkled face and her eyes were pink, which didn't match her age. Lan Yu walked over, opened the car door and sat down. Qin Chun reached out to take the medicine and opened it. It was to be taken in one go and didn't need to be taken twice. She put the medicine in her mouth and swallowed it. There was a sweet taste at first, then a bitter taste spread in her mouth, just like her relationship with Lan Yu. She pursed her lips and a pained expression appeared on her face. Lan Yu frowned. "Why aren't you drinking water?" He went to the front seat but couldn't find it. Qin Chen's tone was indifferent. "I don't need it. I've already eaten." She leaned her head against the back seat and said tiredly, "Take me home. I'm a little tired." Lan Yu's handsome face twitched slightly, but he didn't say anything. He just stared at her. After a long time, he finally pursed his lips and started the car. This time, the car drove very fast, at the speed of lightning and thunder. Lan Yu gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his veins popped out. Qin Chun sat in the back seat and felt a little dizzy, but she didn't say anything. She held it in until the car stopped at the entrance of the condominium. As soon as the car stopped, she got out without hesitation. Since they had already broken up, there was no need to pester her anymore. She was determined. Lan Yu originally felt that there was no need to pester her anymore, but he still couldn't help but open the car door and get out. He called out, "Chanchin, don't you even know how to say goodbye?" Qin Chen's body froze. After a long time, she turned her head and said softly, "Because we won't see each other again." She had already decided to go back to New York and would leave in a week at the latest. Lan Yu was already in the past. She felt that no matter if it was Lan Yu or Rong Lei, it was all in the past. She should forget about them. After she finished speaking, she stared at him for about 2 seconds before turning around and slowly walking into the apartment. There was no trace of nostalgia. Lan Yu took out a cigarette in frustration. He wanted to smoke, but then he looked in the direction where Qin Chun had left. He knew in his heart that he was the reason why she broke up with him, but even now, he wasn't sure if he had ever been in her heart. He was somewhat self-deprecating. This kind of thinking was just like a woman, but he couldn't control it. At this moment, if he didn't do anything, he would feel even more empty than this emptiness. He pursed his thin lips and finally walked over. Qin Chun was pressed against the wall with both hands above her head. Her lips were passionately sealed. This kiss was like a raging fire. Qin Chun didn't resist, because a kiss wouldn't change anything. Lan Yu wasn't that naive. Indeed, after a minute, he pulled back and pressed his thin lips against hers. He said in a low and husky voice, Chin Chun, have you ever felt anything for me? Just a little bit? No. Chin Chen's eyes looked straight at him without a trace of hesitation. Lan Yu's face instantly turned ashen. He stared into her eyes and stared at them for a long time before letting out a sigh. I think so too. He slowly let go of her and took a few steps back. Let's just leave it at that. It's good to be apart. Chapter 2805. She watched as he turned the car around and left very quickly. Then, she heard the sound of the sports car starting up. It had only driven for a few dozen meters when it crashed somewhere with a loud bang. Chin Chun ran out and saw that his car had crashed into a street lamp. The front of the car was damaged. He should be fine. The car door opened and Lan Yu was sitting in the car. Seeing her come out, he looked at her and said in a calm tone, "Dr. Chin, do you still care about me?" He lowered his eyes and said, "Don't worry. I won't be that stupid vegetable anymore." Chin Chen's gaze was a little clear. Then, he walked towards the elevator without a trace of reluctance. Lan Yu got out of the car and looked at the front of the car. The car was probably damaged. He sat in the car and smoked one cigarette after another. After he was done, he called his secretary to take care of the car. Then, he got out of the car and slowly walked out of the neighborhood. Slowly, he left her. When Chin Chun returned to her apartment, she didn't rest but went straight to the changing room. She opened a big suitcase and started to crazily put clothes in it. She didn't know what she was doing. She just did it subconsciously. While she was pretending, she started to cry. She rarely cried, especially in the past few years. She leaned in front of the suitcase and cried silently. She told herself that it would be fine if she cried once. The sun shone on every corner of the exquisitely decorated apartment, but it didn't shine into her heart. When she came back to her senses, she hung the clothes back one by one. She didn't want to let a man affect her again. In the past, Rong Lei was enough. She really didn't need Lan Yu. Just as Chin Chun was packing, the landline at home rang. Then, she remembered that she had left her phone in Lan Yu's car. Or maybe he had thrown it away. She despised Lan Yu in her heart. Not only did he cheat on her, but he also had such a bad temper. She went out to pick up the phone. It was from the hospital. The hospital director called him personally. "Dr. Chin, I know that you've been in a bad mood recently, so we haven't arranged any surgeries." Yes. Of course, Dr. Chin isn't on the payroll right now. However, the patient today has a very powerful background, and his condition is very thorny. Do you want to come to the hospital and have a consultation with the chief doctors of our hospital? Chin Chun paused for a moment and then agreed. She changed her clothes. When she changed into her favorite gray shirt and black trousers, she thought of Lin Cici's seductive body again. A mocking smile appeared at the corners of her mouth. She went downstairs and drove the white Lamborghini sports car to the parking lot. In the hospital, even the cordon was pulled. It was as if they were facing a formidable enemy. But at the same time, it was like a distinguished guest had arrived. However, no matter how distinguished the people who came to the hospital were, they were still patients. Chin Chun opened the car door and walked towards the outpatient building of the hospital. On the first floor, a young nurse came up to him with a peach blossom on her face. "The patient today is very important. Dr. Chin, I have to take a good look," the nurse said, blushing even more. Chin Chun looked at her and said calmly, "I don't know what illness that person has, but I know what it is from your appearance." The nurse covered her face. "Dr. Chin." Chin Chun shook his head and smiled. Although he was smiling, it didn't reach his eyes. In the elevator, the nurse asked softly, "Dr. Chin, are you in a bad mood?" Chin Chun nodded. Chapter 2806. Chin Chun looked at her and smiled lazily. "How handsome must he be to make you like this?" The nurse covered her face again. "You'll know when you see him." Chin Chun pursed her lips and didn't say anything else. When they reached the 6th floor, the elevator door opened. The nurse walked in front of them, and she wanted to clear the way for Dr. Chin. Although the patient today was very handsome, Dr. Chin wasn't bad either. When they reached the VIP room, the nurse slowly pushed the door open for her. When the door opened, there were many people inside, The director, the deputy director, and even the distinguished Mr. Lin were there. However, Qin Chen's eyes only fell on the slender figure. He was facing away from her, but that figure and the aura he exuded made her heart tighten and her soul tremble. The memories of their youth rolled back like a rewind. In his mind, an image kept appearing. In the suburbs of France, there was an endless sun. 12-year-old Qin Chen was running in it. In front of her stood a slender figure. That was the person she yearned for, the person she had been chasing. Rong Lei. Rong Lei. Qin Chen stood there and subconsciously called this name. She was like a nightmare, staring at the man who was facing away from her. The director came over. "Little Qin, what's wrong with you? You don't look very well." Qin Chen ignored him. Her eyes were still on the man in front of her. Rong Lei. Was it him? Was it him in the previous 2 encounters? Was he still alive? Qin Chen wanted to say something, but her lips moved, but she couldn't say a word. Finally, the man turned around. It was a familiar face with the same magnificence, but it was a little more mature than before. He said indifferently, "Qin, long time no see." Qin Chen looked at him, her eyes very straight. At this moment, she seemed to have returned to the sea of flowers in France, as if she had returned to the time when she was 12 years old and purely liked someone. At that time, she was still a little girl. At this moment, she looked at the man in front of her with the eyes of a little girl. Rong Lei slowly stepped forward, stretched out his beautiful slender hand, and placed it on Qin Chen's forehead, helping her tidy up her hair. His voice was incredibly gentle. "Aren't you happy to see me, Chen?" When he called her that, she came back to her senses a little. It seemed that there were others who called her that. Qin Chen's eyes slowly became clear. Finally, she said in a hoarse voice, "Rong Lei, it's me." Rong Lei's fingers slowly stroked her hair. His voice was slightly husky and charming. "My Chun, how did you become like this?" All the female nurses and doctors were stunned. "Her voice is so beautiful, but my Chin? Oh my God. Did Dr. Qin and the man in front of him have a one-night stand?" Looking at them standing together, it was really pleasing to the eye. Moreover, Dr. Qin's gaze had never been so gentle. Mr. Rong and Dr. Qin were like the head of a family and a little attendant. They looked so loving. Qin Chen finally came back to her senses. She said calmly, "Because that person, he is no longer here." The next second, she was pulled into Rong Lei's arms. The warmth drove away the coldness of the past. Rong Lei rested his chin on her hair, and his voice was a little hoarse. "Now he is back. Chen, he is back, and he will never leave again." Qin Chen's gaze was shallow. "Really?" Chapter 2807. Qin Chen stood upright. She did not react, nor could she react. The person who had died in her heart for 12 years had come back to life at this moment. At this moment, he was here. At the entrance of the VIP room, Lan Yu stood quietly with his hand wrapped in gauze. He watched quietly, watching her being hugged and kissed by someone else. The corner of his mouth showed a hint of coldness. That man, his name was Rong Lei. At this moment, was he acting out some romantic love story? It was so beautiful that it did not seem real. It really made him feel pain in his heart. It was painful, very painful, but this kind of pain was also a kind of relief. It turned out that she had been waiting for such a man. It turned out that when she said that she wanted to separate temporarily, it was because this man came back that she wavered. Lin Cece said that she went over that night because she wanted to make up with him. Now it seemed that it was really ironic. Qin Chen said that she had never fallen for him. He originally thought that she said that because she was proud. Now that he thought about it, he was really stupid. Lan Yu laughed at himself and wanted to look away. Qin Chen suddenly turned her head. She looked at Lan Yu with a pale face. Lan Yu pursed his lips into a beautiful arc. Then he chuckled and said, "Congratulations." After that, he took his medicine and walked straight away. He did not look at her again. Qin Chen looked at him, and her cheeks trembled slightly. She looked at the direction in which Lan Yu left, and her feet involuntarily took a step forward. Then, Rong Lei held her in his arms again. He rested his chin on her shoulder and said gently, "Chun-chun, I missed you very much." Chin-chun stood still, her fingers quietly clenched into fists. She seemed to have gotten everything she had dreamed of, but also seemed to have lost something. This kind of gain did not make her happy. Instead, her heart was empty, and there was an indescribable feeling. An hour later, Chin-chun sat by the swimming pool of a luxurious villa. Beside him was a bowl of fruit juice that was delivered by a servant by air. Behind him was a row of servants waiting to serve him. In the swimming pool, the man in black swimming trunks had already swum several laps. Chin-chun looked at him in a daze. Rong Lei's tall and sturdy body walked to the edge of the pool, and the servant immediately took a bath towel and prepared to dry him. Rong Lei took it, wiped it by himself, walked to Chin-chun's side, and sat down. His well-built body had just the right amount of muscles, especially his six-pack, which was wrapped like velvet, exuding an enchanting luster. To use one word to describe it, it would be men and women. To use 4 words to describe it, it was a man, a woman, and a woman. He had always been handsome, but now, in addition to his maturity, there was also a hint of domineering aura. Chin-chun had grown up with him, but at this moment he felt like a stranger. He was clearly the same as before, and he also called her Chun-chin. He was as intimate as before, but she just felt that something was different. Rong Lei took the juice and placed it in front of her. "Why aren't you drinking?" Chin-chun shook her head. "I'm not too thirsty." Chin-chun used to like this the most. Rong Lei didn't mind and put it down. Then he asked casually, "That man today, is he your friend? Or is he wooing you?" Chin-chun looked at him for a while before she lowered her eyes. "He was just a patient. Now he's not. It's already no longer relevant." Chapter 2808. Rong Lei didn't ask anymore. There was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. Then he reached out and stroked her hair. "Since it's just an ordinary patient, there's no need for us to meet again." Chin-chun didn't say anything else. She just looked into the distance. Her gaze was clear. Rong Lei's gaze fell on her neck. There was an obvious hickey there. It was very fresh. It was obvious that it was left not long ago. His dark eyes were dyed with a storm, but it was extinguished in an instant. Chin-chun turned her head and looked at his face. "Rong Lei, why did you go to the hospital?" He was clearly in good health. There was nothing wrong with him at all. Why did he lie to her? Rong Lei smiled. "Because I wanted to see you. Chen-chin, I thought of many ways to appear in front of you. But in the end, someone told me to give a girl a surprise. You see, you were surprised and also a little happy, right?" Chin-chun didn't say anything. She just looked into his eyes as if she was examining something. Rong Lei's handsome face leaned over and asked with a smile, "What are you looking at?" "Chin-chin?" Chin-chen's voice was very slow. "Rong Lei, you haven't told me why you're still alive." Rong Lei's eyes flickered. After a moment, he asked, "Are you unhappy?" "No." Her voice was a little weak. "Sorry. This is probably an occupational disease of doctors." Rong Lei lay down and looked up. His voice was very soft. "If I said that I slept for 10 years, would you believe me, Chan-chin? Took me 2 years to recover." His hand followed and grabbed her hand. He dragged her to lie down side by side with him. He naturally hugged her sideways, brushed the hair in front of her forehead, and gazed at her. The row of servants at the back had good eyesight and quickly retreated in unison. There were only the 2 of them left in the huge swimming pool. Chin-chun felt a little uncomfortable being hugged by him like this. She lowered her voice. "Rong Lei, I don't know. Sorry, I was rude. There's nothing wrong if you don't know." His voice was gentle and his gaze was gentle as he stared at her. "Chun-chin, I never thought that you would become a genius doctor one day." Chin-chun looked at him and smiled faintly. Rong Lei slowly tightened his grip on her and held her in his arms. They liked each other when they were young, but they never had physical contact. After all, Chin-chin was only 12 years old at that time. Even though she was 160, she still had the body of a child. Now, she had grown more than 10 centimeters taller. Although she was still an airport runway, There was still a huge difference between a woman and a child. Rong Lei slowly caressed her face, her short hair, and her gray shirt. His gaze remained gentle. Qin didn't refuse either. Her entire being was immersed in a faint sadness. His appearance wasn't a pleasant surprise, but rather, it brought her back to the moment when he jumped off the building. She looked at him and finally reached out to touch his face with a trembling hand. It was warm, a living Rong Lei. Qin's heart seemed to become alive. Her lips moved and she called his name. Rong Lei, I'm here, Qin. He placed his palm on the back of her hand and stared at her. At this moment, they seemed to have returned to the past together. Rong Lei lowered his head and gently kissed her lips. Her lips were warm and soft, while his was slightly cold. Chapter 2809. As he kissed Qin, she pressed her fingers on his shoulder. This was actually a rejection, and how could Rong Lei not know that? His dark eyes were deep, and his palm slowly moved to her chin. With a little force, she naturally opened her mouth, and he took the opportunity to kiss her. Qin closed her eyes slightly. She recalled the past. When she was 12 years old, there was only Rong Lei in her world. She thought that she should be able to accept it. The man that she had loved for so many years was kissing her now. She should have feelings. She hugged his neck and tried to kiss him back. This kiss was gentle and lingering, but there were no ripples. At least, she didn't feel her heart racing. Nor did she feel like she couldn't wait to find a bed like when she kissed Lanyu. Everything was lukewarm. It was far from her wild imagination when she was a young girl. But obviously, Rong Lei was satisfied. His breathing was messy, and his forehead was pressed against hers. His voice was a little hoarse. Qin, I want you very much. Are you ready? Qin opened her eyes and looked at him. After a long time, she gently shook her head. No. Rong Lei smiled, a very gentle smile. He reached out and rubbed her short hair. I won't force you. With that, he got up. I'm going to the bathroom to take a shower. Let's have dinner later. Qin looked at him and smiled, but Rong Lei didn't seem to be satisfied with her reaction. He lowered his head and said in a very low voice, Aren't you going to ask me why I'm going to the bathroom? Qin had been in love before, so she naturally knew. But at this time, she was flirting with him and pretended that she didn't understand. She shook her head. Rong Lei kissed the corner of her mouth. Because I have to solve it. The man's unique aura, his words, and the fact that he was only wearing swimming trunks at this time, was really seductive. Qin felt that his self-control was very good. He was actually able to smile faintly. Okay. Rong Lei bit the corner of her mouth. Next time, I won't let you go. Compared to him, she seemed a little dull. Before he left, Qin couldn't help but think. Based on Rong Lei's behavior, he should have had a woman before, and it wouldn't have been a short period of time. A man who had never been in contact with a woman would not behave so freely. Besides, they had not seen each other for more than 10 years. They should be very unfamiliar with each other. But he was not. Qin pursed his lips, drank the juice, and rinsed the taste in his mouth. She didn't know why, but she wasn't used to this smell. Rong Lei was very clean, but she felt that Lan Yu's smoky breath made her heart beat faster, and it could stimulate her feminine side. Qin patted his face and smiled bitterly. Qin, you must be crazy. You and Lan Yu are over. The one you have always liked is Rong Lei. Now he is back, and he is alive and well. Rong Lei quickly came out of the bathroom. He had changed into a gray shirt and black trousers, and he looked very handsome. Qin was stunned. She felt that it was a little strange to look at him as if he was looking at her. Rong Lei held her hand and walked to the front hall. He turned his head and smiled. Qin, what are you thinking about? Qin stood still and Rong Lei followed. Qin looked at him and asked softly, Do you care about me now? Chapter 28:10. Rong Lei looked at her and smiled. I like you no matter what you become. Then he hugged her and rested his chin on her hair. Qin, I'm back. I won't leave you again. I won't make you sad again. Okay? She stood there and let him hug her. The setting sun shone on the man and woman who were hugging each other, and it looked particularly beautiful. The dinner was very sumptuous. Before that, Rong Lei played a song for her. He played very well. Qin Chun sat there and listened attentively. After a long time, Qin Chun knew why she couldn't find the same feelings for Rong Lei. All these years, she lived for him, lived in his way for 12 years, and turned herself into him. How could she fall in love with her other self? After Rong Lei finished the song, he took a rose and put it in front of her. At the same time, he leaned over and kissed her cheek. "For my girl." Qin Chen turned her head. "I thought you would say, for your boy." Rong Lei looked at her and smiled. "Chun Chen, as long as it's you, I don't care." She was in a trance. She reached out to touch her own face and said in a low voice, "Even if my generation is like this, wearing a man's shirt, without makeup, without a dress, and with a man's identity, don't you care? I don't care." He held her hand and took out a plain platinum ring from his pocket. "If you want, we can be together now." Qin Chun withdrew her fingers and said softly, "It's too fast. Rong Lei, I haven't thought about it yet." He hugged her from behind and kissed her ear. "Stay tonight and let me persuade you." His meaning was very obvious. He wanted her to stay for the night. Qin Chun looked down and put her fingers on the back of his hand on her waist. "It's too fast." After saying that, she gently pushed his hand away. This was the second time today that she rejected him. Rong Lei's eyes darkened as he smiled. "All right, I'll wait." He kissed her again before walking to the other side to eat with her. It was a luxurious dinner with silver candlesticks and a row of servants waiting behind him. She had seen all of this before, and the Qin family could afford it. However, in recent years, the life of the Qin family had been simple. Most of the time, it was the men who cooked. Qin Chen was used to that kind of warmth, so he was not used to such luxury. She had forgotten that when she was young, she had liked Rong Lei precisely because of his style and the way he was always dignified. Rong Lei raised his goblet. "To our reunion." Qin Chun also raised his glass. "I may not be able to drink. Is it because of your profession?" Rong Lei was very considerate. Qin Chen nodded. Rong Lei gestured for the servant to bring a glass of fruit juice. "I've neglected Chun Chen." There was a flash of pride in his eyes. "I'm happy for you, Qin Chen." Qin Chun smiled. "In the past, I wanted to save people because I didn't want to see anyone die." Lan Yu frowned and looked guilty. "I'm sorry, Qin Chen. I made you sad." "It's been so long." Qin Chun shook his head. "Besides, you're back." Rong Lei smiled. "Yes." Then he ate elegantly. Qin Chen ate some. Although it was delicious, she didn't eat much. Chapter 28:11. "No." Qin Chun wiped his lips, leaned back in his chair, and said calmly, "I'm just used to simple food, such as coffee and rice. Simple food is fine." Her eyes fell on the feast in front of her. "Eating this every day, maybe?" She smiled apologetically. "Rong Lei, you really might get indigestion." Rong Lei walked over and leaned over. "Next time, take me to your favorite restaurant. Okay?" Before Qin Chun could say anything, he continued, "Chun Chen, I want to know about your life." Qin Chun was stunned and said slowly, "Then do you want to know about my past?" "Yes, but I will respect your privacy." Rong Lei appeared to be very elegant. After he finished speaking, he looked at her with a burning gaze. "Chun Chen, do you want to know about my present?" He put her hand on his heart. His meaning was very obvious. He wanted to spend tonight with her and even the night after that. Qin Chun clenched her hand, stood up, and said with a faint smile, "I'll take you to the restaurant I often go to." Rong Lei's gaze swept over the feast on the table. His dark eyes darkened, and a faint smile slowly appeared on his face. Okay. She had to go home eventually. He knew very well that it was just her refusal. She was here with him, but her heart was obviously not with him. She fell in love with the man named Lan Yu. She was no longer the girl from 12 years ago, but she didn't understand her own heart. Rong Lei clenched his fingers. She actually fell in love with a man like that, a man who gave up on her so easily. His handsome face slightly tightened, and he held her hand so hard that it hurt her. Qin endured it and didn't say anything. She didn't find her voice until they were in the car. You drive yourself? What else? Do you want someone to follow you when you're in love? Rong Lei buckled his seatbelt and smiled. Qin didn't say anything more. He guided her to a shop she would go to. She didn't eat over there. Instead, she ordered 2 portions, one for her and one for him. Rong Lei put it down, looked at her, and asked very seriously, "Do I eat at your place, or go back to eat?" Qin thought about it seriously. "You should eat at home." "I'm a little sad." Rong Lei looked at her and started the car. After that, he didn't speak to her anymore. After a long time, Qin tugged at his sleeve. "Are you angry?" "No," he said flatly. Qin said without thinking, "Actually, you can show your anger. That will make you look more real." Chun, are you saying that I'm not real?" Rong Lei casually said, "Actually, you can be a little more real in front of me." "What?" Qin's voice was a little light. Rong Lei didn't answer and sent her all the way back to the apartment. When she unbuckled her seatbelt, he held her down. He turned his head and looked at her quietly. Qin said, "Thank you for sending me back." Rong Lei looked at her. "Is that all you have to say to me?" Before Qin could speak, he asked, "After so many years, Chun, do you still love me?" He said he loved her, not liked her. Many years ago, she was too young to confess, but they were in love at that time. Chapter 28:12. Now that he suddenly asked, it seemed a little abrupt. At least, that was what her expression showed. Qin's expression was a little complicated. She looked at him for a long time before she spoke, as though she had thought about it carefully. However, any words that had been thought through were usually embellished. He didn't really want to hear it, so he stopped her. Chun, it's getting late. Let's go upstairs." Qin wanted to say something but stopped herself. In the end, she opened the car door and took her portion of coffee and rice. She took 2 steps and came back to stand by his side. Rong Lei rolled down the car window, revealing half of his handsome face. Qin went over and kissed the corner of his mouth. She said in a low voice, "I will slowly find the memories that belong to us." Her voice became even lower. "Rong Lei, I've been like this for a long time. It's been a long time since I could find the feelings of the past. All that's left are memories, just thoughts of you." Her voice was elegant, like the sky full of suns, easily pulling them back to the past. When she said that, he pulled her over. "Chun, we have so many beautiful memories. You will definitely find them. I will wait for you." She nodded, lifted her body, and smiled at him. Then she ran to the apartment. Rong Lei watched as she disappeared into the elevator. Then he got out of the car and took out the curry rice. He looked at the takeaway, which was filled with that man's aura. He knew that she had eaten with that man before, so they were familiar with each other. His mornings had always been exquisite. She would never eat such food in the past. He wanted to slowly change her and bring her back to his world, not lose her way like she was now. In the end, the takeaway was thrown into the trash can. Qin came out of the elevator. When she looked up, her vision went black and her body hit the wall. In front of her was a hot body. The owner of that body reeked of alcohol and his temperature was frighteningly high. She was stunned and pushed him away. "Lanyu, are you crazy?" Lanyu took a few steps back, looking disheveled. He lowered his eyes and looked at her. His gaze was very, very cold, with a hint of mockery. "Come back from the dead? Old Qin. Qin, should I congratulate you?" Qin took out his card and wanted to open the door, but his body was hugged from behind. The card in her hand was broken into 2 halves. "If you don't make things clear today, don't even think about leaving." Qin struggled but failed, so he closed his eyes slightly. "What do you want me to clarify? We made it clear when Lin Cece was on your bed." Lanyu stared into her eyes. "That was a trap. Do you believe it? Lin Cece and Rong Lei know each other. She did it on purpose." Qin frowned. "That's not what you said when you hugged Lin Cece, who was only wearing her underwear." With that said, she smiled. Lan Yu let go. We're not compatible. Her words still angered him. He hugged her in his arms and bit her earlobe from behind, saying angrily, "Are you compatible with that pretty boy then? He looks like he's impotent. Can he satisfy you like I do? Can he make you cry and scream in pleasure?" He had just finished speaking when he received a slap on his face. Chapter 28:13. Lan Yu glared at her, and his voice was even colder than hers. "Really? Call the police?" He pressed her against the wall and narrowed his eyes. "I fucked you so many times. Why didn't you call the police? Instead, you hugged me and told me to be harder and faster, huh?" What he said made Chen feel extremely embarrassed. She pursed her lips and glared at him. "Lan Yu, be rational. Be rational." He punched the wall again, and the wound that hadn't healed last time burst open again. Blood splashed everywhere. Chen almost thought that his hand was going to be crippled. Her body was pressed against the wall, and she didn't move at all. Lan Yu put one hand on the wall, leaned forward, and said coldly, "My woman has been with another man, and you're asking me to be rational?" Chen felt that he was crazy, so she restrained her voice and said, "Can you be reasonable?" "I'm not." His voice suddenly became hoarse. "Chen, why should I be reasonable?" As he said that, he held her face with his bloody palm and kissed her. In fact, Chen could have pushed him away, but she was afraid that she would really cripple his hand. So she gritted her teeth and didn't let him in. However, the man in a rage was terrifyingly savage. He kissed her desperately, and she refused. So he pinched her chin and forced her to open her mouth. This kiss was brutal and direct, with a touch of blood. That dense aura was like a dose of the strongest village medicine, sweeping over them. Gradually, the kiss changed, and several buttons on Chen's shirt were undone. The fire of passion spread. About 5 minutes later, Chen grabbed Lan Yu's hair and let out a long breath. "Let go." He moved away a little, but he didn't completely leave. Instead, he put his chin on her shoulder and murmured, "Chen, you're very cruel. You gave me so much hope, but you threw me away just like that." Chen turned his face away. "We're not suitable for each other. I can't get over what happened that day." Lan Yu let go of her at this time and took 2 steps back. His voice was a little hoarse. "The one you can't get past is not Lin Cece, but Rong Lei." He suddenly laughed, and it was a somewhat desolate laugh. "Chen, you still love him, don't you? Your heart has always been him, and I'm just a joke when you're bored. I'm not even a substitute." He took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it. He looked at her and laughed at himself. "How can a person like me be a substitute for your idol?" As Lan Yu spoke, he pinched the cigarette butt and blew a ring of smoke right onto her face. He did it on purpose, and Chen only felt sad. She turned her little face away and said very softly, "Lan Yu, you should start your new life." "New life?" He laughed. "Yes, it's time to start a new life. You said that your relative named Huang Yasi is not bad. I might as well marry her. I don't want to be your husband, but it's not bad to be your cousin-in-law." Chen opened her eyes wide and stared at him. "Lan Yu, you bastard." She reached out and wanted to slap him, but her arm was caught in the air by him. He said softly, "Don't make me angry, or I'll really provoke her." Chen's eyes were already wet. Chapter 28:14. Her tone was very agitated, and her body was also madly in love with him. However, Lan Yu did not move. He sneered, "Chen, do you really think that I am a man who will be happy after venting my beast jade?" His voice was even colder. "Why would I want a woman who has other men in her heart?" As he spoke, he pressed the button for the elevator and walked in without looking at her again. Blood was dripping down from his arm. Chen looked at the blood and felt like her heart was being eaten away. She stood there for a very, very long time. She felt that Lan Yu was the man who could arouse her desire, but Rong Lei was not. Putting Lan Yu aside, did she really want to be with Rong Lei? Chen was at a loss for a moment. When she was young, she liked Rong Lei, and it was even an unforgettable love. But after all these years, it wasn't that she didn't feel that the love had faded, turning into a memory. Perhaps it was just a memory, and liking him was just a habit. Subconsciously, she still looked at him with the eyes of a 12-year-old girl. However, she was not a 12-year-old anymore. She was a mature woman who stood at the top and had seen all kinds of outstanding men. Rong Lei was still extraordinarily honorable, but she always felt that something was missing. After a very long time, Qin Chen found out that it was because Rong Lei had no flesh and blood. Although honorable, it was too far away. There was no sense of reality. Qin Chen stood there and looked at him quietly for a long time before returning to her apartment. She walked to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Her red lips were red and swollen, and there was a row of blue and purple finger marks on her collarbone. It looked shocking. Qin Chen pursed her lips and used water to wash her lips and the marks on her collarbone. However, no matter how she rubbed it, she could not get rid of the smell. She only needed to close her eyes to remember the way he kissed her. Qin Chen suddenly opened his eyes and let out a long breath. No, she couldn't think about it anymore. She had broken up with Lan Yu. Right now, she should be with Rong Lei. She would try her best to fall in love with him again. She turned on the hot water and soaked herself in the bathtub. She was so tired she fell asleep. She dreamt of the year when she was 12 years old in France. In the endless sea of sunflowers, Rong Lei walked towards her with a smile on his face. He had a beautiful smile, the most beautiful boy she had ever seen. Seeing him smile, Qin Chen also smiled. She watched as he walked toward her. Her eyes were filled with countless little stars. It was a gaze that only appeared when she was looking at her lover. Suddenly, Rong Lei's good-looking and sunny face turned into a skeleton. That skeleton even had a terrifying and strange smile on its face. Qin Chen woke up with a start. When he woke up, his forehead was covered in hot sweat, but his body was cold. She touched it with her hand. It turned out that the water had turned cold. She got up and went to take a hot shower. However, she still caught a cold. Her nose was running and she was sneezing. At that moment, she felt hungry and remembered that she had a serving of coffee and rice that she had not eaten. She heated it up casually. When she opened it, she smelled the delicious aroma. She was instantly healed. Qin Chen had a big appetite. He finished it in one go. Then he took the toilet paper and crawled into bed. Although he did not turn on the air conditioner, his body was cold the whole night. Chapter 28:15. In the middle of the night, she turned over, but she still could not fall asleep. In the end, she sat up and leaned against the headboard. She did not know if she was missing someone's body temperature. She only knew that when that person was around, if she caught a cold, she would be treated as a princess. Qin Chen thought about it and felt that he was a little ridiculous. Since when did he become so pretentious? While Qin Chen could not fall asleep in a luxurious villa, Rong Lei held a glass of red wine in his hand and stood by the window. In the dark night, only a small light was turned on in the hall. The light around him was dim, and his tall body was hidden in the darkness, making him look even more ghostly. Anna stood behind him for a long time. Finally, she stepped forward and hugged him from behind. She murmured, "Master, do you need me to serve you tonight?" Rong Lei did not move. He only asked calmly, "How's the matter I asked you to arrange?" Anna's fingers were nimble to please him. Her voice was more like a sigh. "It's all arranged. I'll get the news in a while." Rong Lei pushed her away. His tall body slowly walked to a set of Italian sofas and sat down. Anna understood what he meant and followed him. She knelt in front of him and worshipped him, using all kinds of ways to please him. She continued until her master was satisfied. Of course, such a unilateral action took a very long time. After a full hour, her master groaned, and then pushed her away. Anna was still kneeling there. She carefully cleaned up her master with a tissue and then looked at her master charmingly. Rong Lei said calmly, "Sit here." Anna was a little surprised. It was obvious that her master wanted to give her some charity tonight. She got up carefully and sat down even more carefully. She did not dare to kiss his lips. She only dared to kiss his chin. Rong Lei's slender and beautiful jade-like fingers pinched her face. There was no warmth. It was as if he was treating the lowest class of women. However, it was enough to make Anna ecstatic. She was so excited that it was as if she was celebrating the end of the world. Her master, on the other hand, was as calm as a machine. He did not show any emotion at all, as if he was giving a bone to a loyal dog. Just as they were about to part from each other, there was a knock on the door. A man in black came in and handed a player to Ronglei. He acted as if he didn't see what was happening between the man and the woman. Perhaps he was already used to it. Ronglei opened it, and Anna opened it by herself like a snake. The screen in Ronglei's hand showed the scene of Lanyu and Qin-chun kissing crazily at the door. Qin-chun took the initiative to kiss Lanyu. Ronglei's fingers tightened, and the thing in his hand shattered into powder. Then, the woman on his body was thrown to the ground like a rag. Anna's forehead was covered in sweat as she called out to her master. The man in black replaced Ronglei and covered Anna's body. In such a big space, the warm sounds of a man and a woman in love were heard again. And Ronglei, after an hour, stood opposite Qin-chun's apartment. The lights in the apartment were not turned off. He saw Qin-chun eating alone. He knew that the man brought her to eat that kind of food. That was why she treasured it so much. Ronglei's eyes flashed with coldness. A man like that should never have appeared in this world. As long as that man disappeared, his Chun-chun would slowly fall in love with him. Chapter 28:16. The next day, Qin-chun saw the news of Lan Yu's accident on the social news. The news reported that the CEO of the Grand Hyatt hotel chain had unfortunately been involved in a car accident this morning. His condition was unknown and he had been sent to Shangyuan Hospital for emergency treatment. Emergency treatment? Qin-chun put down the milk in her hand and was stunned for a moment. Then, she immediately went back to her room to put on a shirt. She didn't even change out of her slippers before she went downstairs and drove to the hospital. The entrance of Shangyuan Hospital was blocked by reporters. They were probably fighting for this news. Qin-chun didn't have to go through the underground parking lot to get in. She went straight to the emergency room. She thought that she would see Lan Yu lying like a rag like the last time. Otherwise, he would have a fracture or something. She was anxious because he was her patient. She didn't want anything to happen to him. Qin-chun rushed over. Qin Mu, who was at the door, saw her and instinctively stopped her. Qin-chun? Lan Yu, what's wrong with him? Qin-chun said as she opened the door. However, the situation inside still made her a little dumbfounded. Lan Yu was inside, but her distant cousin, Huang Xia, was also inside. To be precise, she was kissing Lan Yu. It was a kind of reluctant kiss. Huang Xia's cheeks were deeply sunk in and her face was red. It was obvious that she had never been kissed by a man like this before. Qin-chun's face was a little pale. She just watched as Lan Yu kissed someone else in front of her. Actually, it wasn't the first time, but her heart still felt numb. It was very uncomfortable. She didn't know how long she watched. It was about a minute, but it also seemed like an hour. She only knew that when she left, her face didn't look too good. Qin Mu closed the door and said softly, "I came for a prenatal checkup and happened to see this. Chun-chun, have you really made up your mind?" Qin Mu had always felt that Ronglei's appearance was very strange. How could a person who had been dead for so many years come back to life just like that? However, it was not convenient for her to tell Qin-chun about this at the moment. She couldn't figure it out. Since Ronglei was still alive and like Qin-chun, why didn't he appear earlier but let her suffer for so many years? This kind of love, is it love? Perhaps there was love and possessiveness, but it was not pure. Qin-chun looked at Qin Mu in a daze. After a while, he laughed hoarsely and said, "Yes, I've decided. I'm even more certain now." Last night, he said that he was with Huang Xia. She thought that he wouldn't embarrass her like this, but after just one night, he was hugging her cousin and kissing her. Should she be happy for him or sad for herself? Qin-chun lowered his eyes. "Mu, I'll go back first." She looked up again. "Where's Zhou Chongguang? I'm worried about you, so I'll take you to my office." Qin Mu held her hand and said, "Chun-chun, I'm fine." She looked at Qin-chun and said, "I also have something to say to you." Qin-chun's eyes were a little blank. After a while, he nodded. Just as they were about to leave, Huang Xia came out of the emergency room. Her face was bright red, and her red lips were slightly swollen. She looked like she had been completely loved. She looked at Qin Chun and smiled very carefully. "Chen Chen, can you take a look at Lan Yu's leg?" Qin Chen looked at her and didn't say anything. At this moment, Qin Mu couldn't help but say, "Xia, don't go too far. Go and call another doctor." Chapter 28:17. Huang Xia looked at Qin Chen carefully and said in a low voice, "Qin Chen, do you blame me for taking Lan Yu away?" Qin Chen looked at her. Huang Xia cried like a pear blossom in the rain. Qin Mu rolled her eyes. She used to think that this cousin was a good person, but she didn't expect that she was a complete drama queen. She pursed her lips and looked at Qin Chen. Qin Chen had always been sharp-tongued. She didn't know if he would say something nicer this time. Sure enough, Qin Chen was unhappy and said something unpleasant. "Yes, I blame you. So, are you going to give him back to me?" This result was not what Huang Xia wanted to hear, and she didn't expect it. She thought that since she and Qin Chen were cousins, Qin Chen wouldn't put down his pride and say something so unpleasant. Huang Xia was also born in a high family, so she couldn't accept it for a while. Her eyes were full of tears, but she held them back for a long time. That look, the pear blossom in the rain, was very lovable. However, Qin Chen wasn't in the mood. She looked at Qin Mu and said, "Let's go." Qin Mu didn't care about Huang Xia. Before they became real sisters, cousin and cousin were all fleeting clouds. "You bullied my Chen Chen. Go away. Who cares about your little feelings?" Huang Xia watched Qin Chen and Qin Mu leave and didn't care about her. For a moment, she felt embarrassed. She didn't think she was wrong. Qin Chen had broken up with Lan Yu and was with another man. Why couldn't she be with Lan Yu? Yes, she kissed Lan Yu first. Lan Yu just didn't push her away after seeing Qin Chen. She knew that even though she minded it, she wasn't willing to let go of such an opportunity. As long as she could be with Lan Yu, she didn't care. Moreover, she was confident that she could defeat Qin Chen. She didn't dare to say for others, but Qin Chen always appeared as a man, so she was confident. She turned around and saw Lan Yu standing behind her. His gaze was deep and serene. Huang Xia was stunned and carefully asked, "You heard everything? Hear what?" His voice was a little lazy. "Don't provoke Qin Chen again. I don't like meddlesome women." Huang Xia immediately understood what he meant. She was pleasantly surprised and covered her face. "Lan Yu, really?" Lan Yu's gaze was somewhat indifferent. "Let's give it a try." Right now, he wanted to find a woman who liked him and loved him, because always chasing after a woman's footsteps was too tiring. Huang Xia walked up slowly and reached out to touch his good-looking chin. "Am I dreaming? Ms. Huang, where's your modesty?" Lan Yu smiled faintly, but there wasn't a trace of a smile in his eyes. There was even a little emptiness. He looked into the distance, in the direction where Qin Chen had left. He instinctively knew that he chose Huang Xia not because Huang Xia loved him, but because Huang Xia and Qin Chen were relatives, and he could still see Qin Chen. A self-deprecating smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. In Qin Chen's office, Qin Chen placed Qin Mu on the sofa and slowly made coffee. Qin Mu watched her pour cup after cup of coffee and finally couldn't help but say, "I'm pregnant and can't drink coffee." "Chen Chen, have you forgotten?" Qin Chen seemed to have just woken up. He pursed his lips and said, "Oh, sorry. I was a little distracted." Chapter 28:18. Qin Chen was slightly stunned. "Lan Yu, isn't he?" Qin Mu's voice was faint. "You came here so early in the morning because you were afraid that something would happen to him. You saw him with Xia, and you were so distracted." Qin Mu asked directly, "Chen Chen, did you break up with him?" Qin Chen lowered his eyes. "I broke up with him. It's all clear." She paused again. "I'm already with Rong Lei. Isn't he also with Xia?" Qin Mu walked up to her, threw the coffee cup in her hand aside, and looked at her seriously. "What about your heart? Who is in your heart? Can you tell me?" Qin Chen smiled. "I don't know. But I want to try with Rong Lei now. Qin Mu held her hand tightly. Rong Lei is very dangerous. I know. Qin Chen murmured. He came to me, and he won't leave without a result. And I also want to know if I still have feelings for him. Perhaps this was a dangerous game, but being with Rong Lei was the safest. This was Qin Chen's instinct. Qin Mu was a little stunned for a moment. Qin Chen looked at her and smiled. Mumu, we are twins. I know what you are thinking. Qin Mu touched her forehead and smiled. She patted Qin Chen and said, "What a terrible telepathy." Qin Chen reached out and hugged her, then squatted down and put his face on Qin Mu's belly. "I will take good care of myself. Don't worry." Qin Mu nodded. "I'm relieved that you know what to do." She lowered her head and reached out to touch Qin Chen's face. Only she could touch Qin Chen's face so unscrupulously. The scene was very beautiful. When Zhou Chongguang came in, he saw his wife and his brother-in-law hugging each other lovingly. His heart was in a mess. Although Qin Chen was a woman, he looked no different from a man. Moreover, he was so intimate with his wife. Zhou Zong was jealous, seriously jealous. He slowly closed the door. Mumu. Qin Mu looked at her husband and saw the unknown meaning in his eyes. She stuck out her tongue. What a childish man. How could he be jealous of Qin Chen? However, she still obediently let go of Qin Chen and asked her to go with her. Qin Chen agreed, but at that moment, Mr. Lin's secretary came over and said that Mr. Lin wasn't feeling well and asked Qin Chen to go over and take a look. Qin Chen motioned for him to wait outside and looked at Qin Mu gently. "Go home and rest. I'm fine." She winked at Zhou Chongguang. Zhou Chongguang understood. He helped his little wife to the door and said in a low voice, "Qin Chen can handle it. Don't worry." Qin Mu left first. She had been pregnant recently and always wanted to sleep. After watching them leave, Qin Chen said to Mr. Lin's secretary, "Go." With that, he put on his white robe, put his hand in his pocket, and followed the secretary. Mr. Lin's problem was not serious. He was just a little depressed. After checking him, Qin Chen smiled faintly. It's not a big problem. He can't lie in bed all the time. He needs to move around. It's best to climb the stairs. Mrs. Lin looked worried. How can I do that? He hasn't recovered yet. Chapter 28:19. Madame Lin looked at her husband with a worried expression. "Dr. Qin, we know you don't have Shang Yuan system. You can follow old Lin there. He won't mistreat you." Before Qin Chen could speak, she continued, "Old Lin can give you the same treatment in New York, even better than there." Qin Chen smiled. "Thank you for your kindness, madam. I prefer to live a carefree life. Besides, the laboratory over there is also mine. I don't have much research to do. I'm afraid I'll let Mr. Lin down." Mr. Lin patted his wife's shoulder and said calmly, "Everyone has their own ambitions. Don't make things difficult for little Qin. No matter what, I'm indebted to little Qin. Take good care of Cece and don't let her mess around again." Qin Chen was a girl, so she couldn't mess around. If word got out, her reputation would be ruined. The Lin family couldn't afford to lose face like this, and they would let little Qin down. Mr. Lin was clear about this. Madame Lin nodded. "I will. Don't worry." Qin Chen now understood that Xiong Lei was fake. Once again, he tried to convince her to follow Mr. Lin to work for him. She also knew that Mr. Lin was kind to her because she had cured him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let her off so easily. Qin Chen left first. Before she left, she said a few polite words. With the Lin family's status, it was always good to be polite. As soon as she left, Madame Lin sighed. If only Dr. Qin was a man. No matter what, he would help Cece win him over. As soon as she said this, Mr. Lin said, if he was a man, he would like Cece? Madame Lin didn't speak for a long time. Mr. Lin's voice was a bit low. The most important thing for a husband and wife is a good relationship. Nothing else is important. As he said this, Madame Lin's eyes became a bit red. All these years, you've been busy. I've been taking care of Cece alone. Are you blaming me for being so willful now? Mr. Lin looked at his wife and sighed. How could that be? I can't help it now. This time you have to take care of Cece and make her follow us. She can't mess around anymore. He sighed again. You saw the newcomer, Rong Lei. Mr. Lin had a pensive look on his face. Tell Cece not to touch this person. I heard from Secretary Zhang that she saw Cece and Rong Lei meeting a few days ago. This man is very dangerous, and as a last resort, he ordered people to tie her up and board the plane. Do you understand? Madame Lin frowned. Rong Lei? Dr. Qin used to like her. She has been dead for 12 years. Now she is alive and has a prominent identity. Mr. Lin said softly, it's very possible that this person has connections with politics, especially with the West. If Cece is involved with him, will I still be able to be the minister? Took Madame Lin a long time to digest the information. She said with difficulty, doesn't Dr. Qin like Mr. Lon? They seem to be fine. Then you have to ask your precious daughter what she has done. Mr. Lin was infuriated at the mention of this. However, Mr. Lin knew his daughter's whereabouts better than Madame Lin. Madame Lin was shocked. After a long time, she said, what did Cece do? Mr. Lin's voice was slightly cold. She ran to Lan Yu's house and climbed into his bed. Then Cece and Lan Yu had sex? Madame Lin was shocked. Mr. Lin snorted. Not yet. She doesn't have that kind of charm. Chapter 28:20. In the villa, a tall man stood by the window with a glass of red wine in his hand. Anna stood behind him and whispered, I'm sorry, master. We failed this time. Rong Lei turned around and stared at Anna with his dark eyes. Where is he? In the hospital. Anna lowered her head. There are too many people. We can't make another move. Also, I think Lan Yu is already on his guard. It might be difficult to make another move. Rong Lei drank the red wine in the glass in one gulp and said faintly, then let him live for a while longer, and let him know, Chun is mine and he will lose miserably. This was a battle between males. Since he didn't die this time, he would let him live a little longer. Rong Lei asked again, where's Qin? Anna hesitated. She went to the hospital. Almost immediately, the glass in Rong Lei's hand shattered. The red liquid stained his hand, resembling the color of fresh blood. Anna hurried to clean it up for him, but Rong Lei waved her away. Go find all the information on that man. He didn't think much of Lan Yu before, but it was obvious that his Chun couldn't help but fall in love with him. He wanted to see what was so special about this Lan Yu that Chun cared about and liked. Anna acted quickly. Within half an hour, she had gathered all the information and sent it to Rong Lei. Then, she poured Rong Lei another glass of red wine. Rong Lei savored the fragrant wine as he looked at the information. His gaze turned gloomy. Lan Yu, a genius student, entered an Ivy League university at the age of 20 to study economics. However, for some reason, he changed his major to oil painting. After graduation, he was still very famous in New York. Rong Lei flipped to the last few pages and his expression darkened. Lan Yu had only taken over the Grand Hyatt Hotel a few months ago, and the hotel's performance had increased by 200%. What kind of man was he? Rong Lei put down the documents, sat on the sofa, and looked at the sky of B City. Then he whispered, find something for Lan Yu to do. Don't let him be so idle. Anna nodded and quickly left. Over the next few days, there were several incidents of accidental casualties in the Grand U Group's hotels across the country. For a time, the direction of society was very unfavorable to Grand U Group. Lan Yu naturally became a flying man, flying here and there to deal with matters. At the same time, he also held a few internal meetings to increase the security of the hotel to an unprecedented level. While Lan Yu was flying out of town, Qin Chun came to the villa. Anna brought her to the second floor. Qin Chun sat down in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked outside. The view from this corner was very good. She could almost imagine that Rong Lei probably liked to sit here. It was very much in line with his personality. Qin Chun looked down and suddenly felt a little unfamiliar. She didn't know if it was because they hadn't seen each other for too long, or because she had never understood him. Rong Lei walked out in a bathrobe. He must have taken a shower, and there was a faint smell of shower gel on his body. Smelled very good and very fresh. He walked over and gave Qin-chun a polite kiss. "You're here." Qin-chun smiled and looked at him sitting opposite her. She was just about to speak when the servant brought over 2 sets of breakfast. Rong Lei smiled. "Chun, let's have breakfast together." Qin-chun forced a smile. "I've eaten the curry rice from that restaurant." Rong Lei smiled. "It's very good." Chapter 28-21. Qin-chun smiled faintly. "Do you really think it tastes good?" Rong Lei shrugged his shoulders. "Of course. Chun-chun, I'll try to like whatever you like." Qin-chun looked at his breakfast and suddenly said, "I want to eat now. Can you accompany me?" Rong Lei smiled faintly. "Of course." Qin-chun took his hand. "Let's go now." Rong Lei had a faint smile on his face. His smile was a little indulgent. He held Qin-chun's hand. "I'm going to change." "Chun-chun, don't tell me you want me to wear this to eat with you?" Qin-chun smiled awkwardly. "Okay. I'll wait for you outside." Rong Lei pinched her cheek. "I'll be ready in a while." With that, he walked towards the master bedroom. Qin-chun looked at the back of the man. To be honest, Rong Lei was perfect. His appearance was flawless from every angle and was very pleasing to the eye. But there was something missing, Qin-chun thought silently. She suddenly saw the red wine that Rong Lei had drunk. She walked over curiously and picked it up to smell it. Although there was only a small mouthful left, Qin-chun could still smell something different. She slowly brought it to her lips and hesitated for a moment. Just as she was about to taste it, Rong Lei stood at the door. He said faintly, "There's a medicinal ingredient in it. It won't taste good." Qin-chun tilted her head and looked at him. Then she smiled. "What medicinal ingredient?" "It's for nourishing qi." Rong Lei walked over and drank the wine in one gulp. "We can go now." Qin-chun held him back. "Wait." Rong Lei looked at her and said in a low voice, "What's wrong?" She handed him a tissue. "Wipe it. The corner of your mouth looks like it's stained with blood." Rong Lei's gaze was deep. He looked at her for a while before he whispered, "Is that so?" He calmly wiped it off and said, "Tomorrow. Have them replace the ones of this year." Qin-chun didn't mind. "You'll be fine once you get used to it." Rong Lei didn't say anything else and went downstairs with her. He drove a blue Bugatti Veyron, and Qin-chun sat beside him and watched him start the car. Rong Lei was dressed in white and looked very handsome. He also drove an expensive car, so when he arrived at the affordable restaurant, he attracted a lot of attention. Of course, Qin-chun, who was traveling with them, was also dazzling and dazzling. In the restaurant, almost everyone's eyes fell on them. They didn't feel the slightest bit uncomfortable, as if walking together was natural. When they were about to reach the innermost seat, Rong Lei suddenly held Qin-chun's hand and said, "Let's sit here." Qin-chun nodded and was about to sit down with him when his eyes fell on Lan Yu, who was not far away. Lan Yu was sitting with Huang Xia. He brought Huang Xia here to eat his favorite curry rice. Qin-chun looked down and smiled. He could have looked for anyone, but why did he have to look for his cousin? Huang Xia was really open-minded. Didn't she mind that Lan Yu had slept with her cousin? However, she still didn't expect that men were all bad. As for sleeping with her or not, Lan Yu would never admit it. The moment Qin-chun saw Lan Yu also saw them. Lan Yu stared at them for about a minute. Huang Xia put her hand on the back of his hand and said, "Lan Yu, what are you looking at?" Chapter 28-22. Huang Xia lowered her eyes. "Do you want me to go?" She added, "I don't really want to go. Although Qin-chun and I are distant cousins, we are not familiar with each other. We don't have to come and go together in the future." She raised her eyes. "Lan Yu, do you think I am too cruel?" She said hurriedly, "There are some things that I can't give in to. You will understand, won't you?" Lan Yu didn't say anything. He was still a little disappointed in his heart. He was the kind of man who liked to chase women, but he didn't like women to be devoted to him, especially this woman he didn't like very much. Lan Yu didn't know why he chose Huang Xia. Maybe it was because of his pride. His heart was not on Huang Xia. He had been looking at Qin Chen's table. Huang Xia saw it. How could she not know? She said softly, Lan Yu, give up. Qin Chen grew up abroad. She and Rong Lei were childhood sweethearts, just like Yi Miyun and Tang Sher. Rong Lei died for 12 years, and Qin Chen was crazy for 12 years. Do you think that you have known her for 1 year is worth their many years? Lan Yu retracted his gaze. You think too much. It's not that I think too much, but I'm afraid. Huang Xia's voice was bitter. I know you don't love me, and you don't even like me. But Lan Yu, at least I am a woman. I can give you normal love and life. This is what Qin Chen can't give you. Lan Yu's face was a little ugly. He looked at Huang Xia. Even if I am not with Qin Chen, it doesn't mean that she is abnormal. Huang Xia was stunned for a moment. She realized that she had said something wrong. She also knew that Qin Chen was still very important in Lan Yu's heart. She was a little bitter, but she was still unwilling to give up. There was a kind of love that was like poison. You knew you shouldn't touch it, but you still couldn't control it. She apologized in a low voice and then felt a little down. Lan Yu quickly finished his coffee and rice. I'm going to work. Do you want me to send you? Huang Xia quickly got up. I'll go with you. She pursed her lips. Lan Yu, you said you wanted to be with me. Have you changed your mind? Lan Yu pursed his lips and sighed. No. Huang Xia bit her lip and hesitated for a moment before grabbing his hand. Lan Yu's body trembled, and then he looked at her hand that was holding him. It's normal when you're in love, isn't it? She whispered. Lan Yu didn't say anything, tacitly agreeing. He held her hand and walked towards the door. Naturally, they passed by Qin Chen's table. Qin Chen lowered his head and drank his soup, pretending not to see it. Only a fool would face such a situation head-on. She just felt a little bitter in her heart. She couldn't say it. She just felt that she and Lan Yu were like fireworks in the sky. It was dazzling for a moment, but soon disappeared, however. That spark remained in his heart. Qin Chen didn't know if it was because they had done too much that it left a deep impression. She pretended not to see it, but Rong Lei was not willing to let it go. Rong Lei smiled. Mr. Lan Yu. Lan Yu's body froze and he looked at the table indifferently. Rong Lei continued with a smile. I heard that there were a lot of accidents in Mr. Lan's hotel, but you still have the leisure to eat with your girlfriend here. Chapter 28-23. Lan Yu looked down and smiled. I also thought that Mr. Rong would stay at home and play tricks, so that I wouldn't have time to accompany my girlfriend. He paused for a moment and said slowly, Mr. Rong, I don't know if you've heard of this saying, the more you want to hold something in your hand, the easier it is to lose it. I'm like this, and Mr. Rong may also be like this. Rong Lei's expression changed slightly. Lan Yu bowed. Just look after your things. If Mr. Rong causes trouble for me again, then I can't guarantee Mr. Rong's safety in B City. He said coldly, Mr. Rong, don't forget that my guests are innocent. Mr. Rong, did you consider Dr. Qin's profession when you did this? After saying that, he left with Huang Xia. Of course, he didn't look at Qin Chen at all. After they left, Qin Chen looked at Rong Lei and said softly, did you do those things? No. Rong Lei's tone was very casual. Chen, you shouldn't have listened to him and believed him. He looked at her. We've done volunteer work together before, haven't we? You should know me very well. Qin Chen looked down, but she thought of the glass of red wine in the villa. After a long time, she said lightly, I believe you. Rong Lei breathed a sigh of relief and ate breakfast with her. It was early in the morning, and the taste of curry was a little strong. Qin Chen ate it very well. She looked at Rong Lei and found that he was also very comfortable. He obviously didn't like it, so why did he pretend to like it? Qin Chen looked at him for a long time and Rong Lei looked up. What's wrong? Qin Chen? Qin Chen took the spoon in his hand and said lightly, don't eat it. You obviously don't like it, so why do you force yourself? Rong Lei took a square handkerchief and wiped his lips elegantly. Because you like it, Qin Chen. I'm willing to try anything you like. Even if you feel terrible? Qin Chen pursed his lips and said seriously, Rong Lei, do you think I'll be happy if you endure it? She paused for a moment before continuing, "If you don't really like him, I'll be able to tell." Rong Lei's eyes fell on her face as if he was studying something. After a long time, he smiled and said, "Yes, I like red wine and white toast. Can I ask if there's any here? Can I change it to ordinary bread?" Qin Chen smiled faintly. Rong Lei nodded. "Okay." Qin Chen called the waiter and asked him to change the clothes. This time, Rong Lei was obviously enjoying his meal. Occasionally, the two of them would exchange a few words. After Qin Chen finished eating, he sat there holding a cup of tea and slowly sipped it. When the tea was almost finished, he said, "Did you come to B-City to look for me?" Rong Lei smiled. "It's obvious, isn't it?" Qin Chen looked down. "I plan to stay in B-City and be an ordinary person." "Rong Lei, are you willing to stay here and not go back to France?" Rong Lei's eyes narrowed. "Qin Chen, we can take it slow. There's no rush to decide where to go. I know your lab is in New York. We can also settle in New York in the future. I don't plan to go back." Qin Chen's tone was indifferent. "Rong Lei, I want to be an ordinary person. If you like outstanding geniuses, then you can give up now." Her tone was a little sharp and a little unreasonable. This was Qin Chen and also another Rong Lei. Chapter 28-24. It's very obvious. Qin Chen looked at him and said straightforwardly, "You were the one behind the incident at Lan Yu's hotel, weren't you?" Rong Lei's thin lips moved as if he wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. Qin Chen said again, "Rong Lei, I want to know your current identity." Her voice was very low. "Why have you become so indifferent to those lives? Do you remember when you couldn't even bear to hurt a small animal?" Her tone became gentle. "Do you remember the frog in the lab? You were punished for such a small life, but now it's a few lives. With a single order, they are gone. They will also have their wives and children waiting for them to go back. They are high-end people, and they may have struggled their whole lives to give their wives and children such a good life. But with a word from you, they will disappear. Rong Lei, don't tell me you haven't thought about this. What made your faith disappear?" "Faith?" Rong Lei's voice was a little agitated. "Chen Chen, are you sure you want to talk to me about this here?" He stood up slightly, and his tall body gave off an inexplicable sense of oppression. Qin Chen raised her head slightly, and she didn't lose in terms of momentum. If it weren't for Lan Yu, she might not have had a showdown with Rong Lei so quickly. The reason why she had a showdown was because she still had a last trace of hope for Rong Lei, for the years they had had together. Rong Lei slowly grabbed her hand and pulled her up. He was very calm. "Let's go back and talk." Qin Chen didn't resist. She followed him to the door and paid. When they got into his car, she whispered, "Don't think about tying me up somewhere. You should know that I'm a doctor, not an ordinary woman who can't even trust a chicken. Also, Rong Lei, if you do that, all our feelings will end." Rong Lei turned his body and looked at her. He said softly, "Are you really going to talk to me like this because of Lan Yu?" Qin Chen looked at him. "You mean you admit that you did all those things?" "Yes," Rong Lei said quietly, "because I know that you were together." Qin Chen glared at him. "The day I came back, I wanted to look for you, but Anna found out that you were with Lan Yu." There was some bitterness in his voice. "I went to your apartment. It was very dark that night and it rained the whole night. I saw with my own eyes my girl hugging another man and lingering in the living room for the whole night. I thought she would wait for me, but when I came back, she was already in someone else's arms." Rong Lei's fingers gripped the steering wheel. "Chan Chun, you blame me, but I can't control it. It's just a man's jealousy, you understand? To determine the winner, by any means necessary." His fingers gently stroked her hair. "I've changed a little over the years, but I still love you. You're the same with us, right?" Qin Chen looked at him and shook his head. "You didn't change a little, but you changed a lot. I promise you, I won't do that kind of thing again as long as you come back to me and completely separate from Lan Yu. Okay?" Rong Lei's voice was very gentle, as if he was coaxing a child. Qin Chen looked at him and then closed his eyes slightly. "Let me think about it. Rong Lei, you make me scared. How many secrets do you have that I don't know? Chapter 28-25. Qinshan looked at him and said softly, "No." She paused for a moment and said, "I won't follow anyone. Feelings are feelings, and other things can only be other things. Ronglei, do you understand?" He looked at her. "Even if it's me, you won't break your principles?" "No." Qinshan's tone was very indifferent, and she seemed to think for a long time before she asked him softly, "Ronglei, do you still feel that way? Are you looking for me because I'm me? Or because my name is Qinshan? Or because I'm a doctor?" Ronglei's expression changed slightly. "There's no difference. Qinshan, you are you. Unique." He smiled and reached out to touch her cheek. His voice became indifferent. "Qinshan, you're thinking too much. We just need to be together. As time goes by, you won't think about these things anymore. Okay?" Qinshan smiled. "Really? Of course." He pinched her little face. "You'll forget him as time goes by." As he said that, he seemed to think of something. "Is he with a distant relative of yours?" "I don't want to talk about this." Qinshan's tone was very gentle. "Take me to the hospital." Ronglei's fingers paused, but he still smiled and sent her to the hospital. When Qinshan got out of the car, Ronglei looked at her and said, "Qinshan, don't you have a goodbye kiss? We'll see each other again, so there's no need." She smiled and waved at him. "I'm going up." Ronglei smiled good-naturedly and watched her leave. When she left, the smile on his face disappeared. He was a man, and he could keenly feel that Qinshan's heart wasn't filled with him anymore. It was Lan Yu. Mentally, she had betrayed him. Ronglei's beautiful fingers clenched the steering wheel. He sat in the car for a long time before he started the car and left. Qinshan walked into the elevator quickly. Because she had something on her mind, she didn't notice that there was someone in the elevator. When she walked in, she heard a familiar voice. She looked up. It was Lan Yu. He leaned against the elevator and looked at her indifferently, but there was a touch of mockery at the corner of his mouth. "Dr. Qin, shouldn't you be busy dating?" Qinshan turned around and looked back into his eyes. Of course. She also saw the hickey on his neck and sneered, "Does it have anything to do with me?" In the next second, her body was forced into the corner of the elevator. His body trapped her between himself and the elevator wall. He lowered his head slightly, as though he was pressing his lips against hers, and whispered, "As your ex, is there a problem with me showing some concern for you?" Qinshan raised his head. "I'm afraid that Mr. Lan's excessive concern will cause some misunderstandings, such as my cousin who isn't very confident." There was a hint of provocation in her eyes. Ever since they broke up, he had always been sarcastic to her. He probably forgot who had been caught messing around with Lin Cece in bed. Even if they hadn't had sex, it wouldn't be long. Lan Yu squinted at her and said in a low voice, "Do you care?" Qinshan chuckled and touched the hickey on his neck. Then, she pulled the collar of his shirt towards her. That posture was very intimate. "What if I say I care?" She looked up at his eyes. There was a small fire in her eyes. It was a little nasty. Chapter 28-26. Lan Yu knew that it was a trap, but he still fell for it. He pressed his lips together and said, "Then show me." The elevator door opened. Huang Xia stood at the door. With a pale face, she looked at the man and the man who seemed to be kissing in the elevator. Her lips trembled and she said, "Qinshan, how could you do this?" She ignored Lan Yu's initiative and blamed everything on Qinshan. Although Qinshan was the one who started it, she didn't feel sorry at all. She just felt a little bored and tired of these little games. She let go of her hand lazily and said, "There seems to be a mosquito in Lan Yu's neck. I swatted it away for him. The wound is quite big." After saying that, she looked at Huang Xia deeply and walked out of the elevator. Lan Yu followed her out and looked at her back quietly. Qinshan suddenly turned around and smiled. "Lan Yu doesn't have any serious injuries in the future. Xinyuan, don't come again. Otherwise, if my cousin thinks that you still have feelings for me, I won't be able to clear my name." Huang Xia was furious. but she couldn't refute Qin Chen's words. No matter how she looked at it, it was her current boyfriend who wouldn't let go of Qin Chen. Qin Chen was completely playing around. Who had ever said that the person you cared about would lose? And she, the person who cared about him, lost completely. However, Lan Song and Huang Xia didn't know that after closing the door of her office. Qin Chen leaned against the door and calmed down for a long time before she cursed. After a long time, she looked down and touched her forehead with a smile. Isn't it just a man you slept with? Do you have to be like this? But when she looked down, there was a drop of hot liquid on her hand. She was shocked. She slowly raised her hand and looked at the drop of liquid on her hand as if she was looking at an alien object. Was this a tear? She was crying. Because of Lan Yu, Qin Chen closed her eyes. She had long forgotten how many years it had been since she last cried. But now she was crying. For a man who easily rolled around with others. But in her heart, she knew better than anyone else. She remembered not only his bad side, but also his good side. She thought that her separation from him had nothing to do with Rong Lei. It was mostly because of her. If she could fulfill all of Lan Yu's requests, if she didn't break up so easily, Lan Yu wouldn't have given up on her. How much he loved her she did not know, but she knew that he still loved her. Qin Chen raised his head and silently suppressed his emotions for a long time before he could cry. She did not need to cry because she and he had agreed to break up. So be it. He wanted to be with Huang Xia, and that would be great. In any case, she might be in danger. Him leaving her was actually for the best. Qin Chen pursed his lips, lowered his head, and looked at his hands. Slowly, she walked to the bar, took out a glass, and poured some water. She put her finger in the water and gently shook it. Then, she took out a box of test paper from the drawer and put it in the water. When she took it out, she saw that the color of the paper changed from yellow to green, full of green. Her eyes narrowed slightly in the morning. Although she did not drink the red wine at Rong Lei's place, when she returned it to him, her finger touched the red wine. There were ingredients in the red wine in her fingernails. And now, she was sure that Rong Lei's red wine was mixed with blood. Chapter 28-27. Qin Chen closed her eyes. There were too many mysteries about Rong Lei. She wanted to unravel them, but the process of unraveling them was like unraveling a ticking time bomb. It was very dangerous. Qin Chen opened her eyes, poured away the water in the cup and washed her hands. She sat in the office until the afternoon. When it was almost time to get off work, Rong Lei called and invited her to dinner, but Qin Chen refused. She didn't know how to face him now. When she walked out alone, she saw Lin Cece. Lin Cece stood in front of a black limousine and looked at Qin Chen with a strange expression. Qin Chen walked over and looked at the driver in the car. She said calmly, "You're leaving?" Lin Cece smiled. "You must be relieved now." "There's nothing to be relieved about. You've never caused me any trouble." Qin Chen leaned against the side and took out a cigarette. She was about to light it when Lin Cece said, "Actually, I knew you were a woman. I knew it from the beginning." Qin Chen didn't light the cigarette in her hand. She looked at Lin Cece quietly. "Is that so? Then do you like women?" "No." Lin Cece's gaze became a little passionate. She took a step forward. "If I said I liked you, would you believe it?" Qin Chen laughed. "Your liking is really unique. Running to Lan Yu's bed is called liking me?" Lin Cece bit her lip. "But I succeeded in breaking you two up." She added, "Hey, you're not really going to be with Rong Lei, are you?" Qin Chen didn't answer. She didn't like Lin Cece, so she naturally wouldn't say anything to her. Lin Cece said to herself, "Actually, Rong Lei is not as good as Lan Yu. At least that night, Lan Yu didn't do anything to me. From the beginning to the end, I was the one who seduced him. He was probably angry with you, so he gave in. In the end, he wanted me to get lost. But when he heard you coming upstairs, he didn't push me away. He did it on purpose to make you jealous. What a stupid man." Lin Cece laughed. "I really don't know why you like him." Qin Chen's expression didn't change. Lin Cece's smile suddenly became even weirder. "Let me tell you a secret. I slept with Rong Lei." Qin Chen's eyes deepened. Lin Cece was a young girl. She didn't feel agitated at all when she talked about this. We did it 5 times in one night. He's very strong, but Lin Cece shrugged. I think he's a mess. His assistant, Anna, is definitely having an affair with him. Lin Cece suddenly added, also, there is a tattoo on Rong Lei's P***nis. It looks like a flame. You must have never seen it before. She blinked. You'll know I didn't lie to you when you see it in the future. Qin Chun clenched his fists. Flame? After saying that, Lin Cece opened the car door. I really don't know that after so many years, you actually waited for such a creature who can't control half of his body. After saying that, Lin Cece got into the car. Qin Chun stood there and didn't move. She believed everything that Lin Cece said. A willful girl like Lin Cece probably went to sleep with Rong Lei to make her break up with Rong Lei. She was really so innocent that it made people sigh. Qin Chun watched Lin Cece's car slowly drive away. She was still standing there. Suddenly, the car stopped again. Lin Cece got out and ran over. Qin Chun. Lin Cece's face was slightly red. I really like you. Chapter 28. She looked at Qin Chan and said seriously, if you give up on them one day, you can come to me. She opened Qin Chen's hand and wrote a string of numbers on his palm. This is my phone number. You have to remember to miss me. Qin Chun was a little speechless and amused. He couldn't hate this little idiot. In the end, Lin Cece hugged Qin Chun forcefully. I'm sorry that my love for you can't live a peaceful life. But Lin Cece paused for a moment and said, with Rong Lei around, Qin Chen, you can't live a peaceful life. Qin Chen's body froze. Lin Cece straightened up. I admit that I was scared away. After that, she jumped into the car again. As the car slowly drove away, she shouted at Qin Chun from the window, Qin Chen, be careful. Okay? Qin Chun watched her leave. After a long time, she lowered her eyes, looked at her hands, and said calmly, I will. She would never die so easily like her teacher. That night, Qin Chun went back to the Qin's house and had dinner with his parents. Qin Mu also went, as well as Yi Muyun and Cher. After dinner, Qin Mu left Zhou Chongguang and went to Qin Chen's room to chat. As soon as Qin Mu entered the room, she saw Qin Chen standing in front of the bookshelf in the living room, touching a trophy. Qin Mu walked over slowly and said softly, Are you missing your mentor again? Qin Chen nodded. He is not only a legend in the medical world, but also another father to me. Qin Mu nodded and sat on the sofa beside him, silently accompanying Qin Chun. After a long time, Qin Chun suddenly said, Mu, I may go back to New York. Qin Mu was stunned. How long will you be gone this time? Qin Chun tilted his head and smiled faintly. I haven't decided yet. Maybe it'll be 2 years, maybe it'll be 5 years, or maybe I won't come back. Qin Mu's expression froze a little. She and Qin Chen had a lot of inspiration. She didn't know what Qin Chun was thinking, but she could feel that Qin Chen's mood was very complicated at this time. Qin Mu stood up slowly and held Qin Chen's hand. Qin Chun smiled at her and said, Mu, I grew up outside since I was a child. Just think of it as a solo trip. I'm fine. She lowered her voice, you know? There are some things I have to do, or else I'll never feel at ease. Besides, she had no choice but to go. She couldn't ignore Rong Lei's existence. A man she had once loved deeply. A man she had suffered for 12 years. But now she wanted to destroy. It was not that Qin Chen didn't hesitate, and it was not that he didn't have a soft heart. However, she had no way out. That year, she remembered that when his mentor fell in a pool of blood, when she hugged him and cried, he only spat out 2 words, flame. For so many years, she had never understood whether it was a name or an organization. And the tattoo on Rong Lei's back was definitely not that simple. Did he have anything to do with his mentor's death? Subconsciously, Qin Chen guessed that there was. But she had to confirm it. These were all very dangerous. She would rather go back to New York than hurt the people around her. Qin Chun looked at Qin Mu and said, Be careful. Don't go out too much. Understand? Qin Mu tightened her grip and said, Qin Chun, I won't let you go. Qin Chen's expression was very firm. Mu, only I can do this. I'm not that great. I just can't watch my mentor die in vain. Although he said that, Qin Mu knew that it was not the case. What Qin Chun was going to do was very dangerous, and she was almost sure that it had something to do with Rong Lei. Chapter 28-29. Qin Chun lowered her eyes and said in a low voice after a long time, I can only say that I'm not destined to be with him. When she didn't dare to love, she met him. And when she dared to love, they had already broken up. Qin Chun smiled bitterly. Mu, that's it. There are some things that I can't decide. She hugged Qin Mu and said, Take good care of yourself. Zhou Chongguang and Shui Mu both need you. Zhou Chongguang is doing well now. She rested her chin on Qin Mu's shoulder and said, Do you know how much I envy you now? You can have a normal life. And she had given 12 years of her life to a person by mistake. When she came to her senses, it was already too late. Lin Cixi told her all this because he wanted her to leave Rong Lei. But now she couldn't. Qin Chen had never cried before. At this time, tears were shining. But she didn't shed a tear. She pursed her lips and pushed Qin Mu away. Don't cry. I'll come back properly. She only told Qin Mu about this. She was afraid that if she told her brother, the entire Qin family and the Tang family would be buried with her. She couldn't be so selfish. But in her heart, she had a vague feeling that there was still someone she was worried about. She knew in her heart that it was Lan Yu, the person she had given up on. Lin Cixi's words had always been in her mind. She didn't dare to think too much about it because if she thought too much, she would regret it and go to Lan Yu at all costs. Perhaps she had always believed in him. She was just throwing a tantrum, but she didn't expect Rong Lei to come back. He came back with a shocking secret. The night was slightly cold. Qin Chun was driving alone on the road with the window open. The wind was blowing, and her face was cold. When she touched it with her hand, she realized that her face was full of tears. She wondered how she had been infected by Mumu. Mumu was pregnant and loved to cry. Just after they parted, he cried. Why was she crying now? Qin Chun wiped her tears and smiled. I can't bear to. Perhaps she would never be able to return. Like her beloved mentor, she would no longer exist in this world. But she still had to do it. She couldn't escape. Besides Rong Lei, there were others. She drove past the night bar. She stopped the car. She tilted her head, looked at the neon lights, and then called Lan Yu. Night bar, come over for a drink. With that, she hung up the phone. She knew he would come. Qin Chun stopped the car and walked slowly to the 24-hour pharmacy by the street. He asked the shop assistant, 2 boxes of DLS. 3 in a box. The shop assistant was about to fall asleep. At this time, a handsome and good-looking young man came to buy this thing. She instantly became alert and her whole body trembled. Sir, what size do you want? So she looked up and down at Qin Chun, coughed softly, and said implicitly, How about medium? Qin Chun took out her wallet and said calmly, Extra large. The shop assistant was shocked. She looked at Qin Chun up and down again and laughed dryly. Sir, this size is more suitable for you. It's safe, easy to use, and comfortable. Qin Chun put the money on the counter and said indifferently, It's for my boyfriend. Not me. Wow. The shop assistant's eyes were fixed on him, and then she slowly promoted other products. Sir, do you want Ma Inglong hemorrhoid cream? It's good for you. It's cool. Many people have used it and said it's good, especially super large ones like your boyfriend. You'll need it. The shop assistant quickly packed it up and winked. It's for your own good. Chapter 28-30. Qin Chun looked at the Ma Inglong and didn't explain. He just packed it up and took it away. When she went to the night, Lan Yu hadn't come yet. She sat down and ordered 2 bottles of wine. She rarely indulged herself and almost didn't drink. But tonight she wanted to get drunk. When Lan Yu came over, Qin Chun was holding a cigarette in one hand and leaning against the back of the chair lazily. He had drunk half a bottle of wine in front of him. Beside him were two women in revealing clothes, who seemed to be hitting on Qin Chun. Lan Yu went over and sent them away. Then he sat opposite Qin Chun. He also lit a cigarette, took a puff and looked at Qin Chun. "What's the matter?" After saying that, he said with some mockery, "Shouldn't you be busy with your old sweetheart? Or Rong Lei can't do it, so you miss me again?" Qin Chun didn't say anything and just poured him a glass of wine. Lan Yu's eyes were fixed on her, but he still drank the wine. Qin Chun poured him another glass. This time, Lan Yu stopped her hand and looked at her deeply. "What do you mean?" Qin Chun looked at him. "Are you going to drink or not?" Lan Yu sneered. "I'm not a casual man." "Really?" Qin Chun said calmly. "Then forget it." She took out the things from her pocket and put them on the table. Then she got up and was about to leave. Lan Yu saw the familiar packaging at first glance and was a little shocked. His Adam's apple moved sexily. Then he grabbed her hand and said in an unbelievably hoarse voice, "What do you mean?" Qin Chun stopped. "Do you want to use them?" She turned around and looked at him coldly. Her gaze was focused, and her temperament was as clear as if she was standing on the operating table. But the words she spoke and the meaning she conveyed were like an aphrodisiac. Lan Yu cursed in a low voice, "Qin Chun, sometimes I really want to kill you with my own hands." She laughed softly, then broke free from him and walked towards the exit. After a few steps, Lan Yu caught up with him. In the dim corridor, he pressed her against the wall, lowered his head and kissed her lips fiercely. "You win." His voice was rough and hoarse, and it even carried a wisp of rage. He was almost rough with her, probably to vent his anger, in this hallway where people might appear at any time. He was doing that to her. "What about that?" Qin Chun hugged his shoulder and gasped. Lan Yu bit her lips harshly. "I really want to bite you to death." His thin lips moved to her ear. "I won't get it in." After that, he did not speak anymore. Only that low voice sounded over and over again. Because she was suppressing herself, because she was restraining herself, she quickly hugged him tightly. Lan Yu hugged her and sneered, "You can't do it so soon." "Huh? It seems that Rong Lei has not been able to satisfy you properly." His tone was not pleasant, and it carried a deep sense of mockery. When he was occupying her, he deliberately said those words to humiliate her, but Qin Chun did not care about all these. She only cared about the last night with this man. No matter how crazy it was, she could accept it. If the bar was a mess, then back at his villa it was crazy. Chapter 28:31. In the end, he even suspected that she had taken some medication. But as she begged him over and over again, he felt the blood in his body boiling. After a night of torment, everything finally returned to peace. Early in the morning, when Lan Yu woke up, his fingers touched the side of his body out of habit. There was no one there. He opened his eyes and looked around. The master bedroom was a mess. There were clothes and tissues everywhere, as well as the 2 boxes of DLS that she had bought. Lan Yu closed his eyes, feeling a little exhausted, but he still sat up and leaned against the headboard. Then he took a cigarette and quietly waited for the person in the bathroom to come out. Yes, he heard the sound of water coming from the bathroom. When Qin Chun came out, he was only wearing a black shirt. He recognized it as his. Lan Yu's gaze fell on her quietly. Then he said indifferently, "Let's talk." Qin Chun stood at the bathroom door, not saying a word. Lan Yu narrowed his eyes. "Don't tell me that last night was just a one-night stand," he said coldly. "Qin Chun, if you dare to say that, I will strangle you to death." Qin Chun smiled faintly. "Then come and strangle me to death." Lan Yu glared at her for a long time before he said coldly, "You're really a good person." With that, he got up and walked to her, grabbing her collar gently. "Can you explain?" Qin Chun looked straight at him. "Because I don't like it when I see you with Huang Xia." "So?" She paused for a moment. "Huang Xia is probably upstairs now. She will be able to admire our disheveled appearance in a while. Lan Yu, do you want to do this? Or should I hide?" His gaze was deep. "You asked her to come here?" "Yes." Qin Chun said nonchalantly. Her casual look infuriated him. His fingers moved to her chin, gently pinched her chin, and coldly said, Qin Chun, what exactly do you want? He lowered his face to hers, almost squeezing her face out of shape. If I leave Rong Lei, I'll leave Huang Xia. There's nothing going on between us. He paused for a moment, and his voice sounded a little unwilling. I can forgive you this time, including the fact that she might have slept with Rong Lei. This was what Lan Yu was most unwilling to do. However, he couldn't reject her temptation. Even if it was just a little bit of hope, he couldn't reject it. Qin Chun clenched his fists and closed his eyes. There was a hint of warmth in her eyes. She didn't know if she wanted to cry again, but she didn't want him to see her weakness. Yes, she couldn't. When she opened her eyes again, there was a look of indifference in them. She looked down and said, Lan Yu, it's just an impromptu game. There's no need to take it so seriously. Do you know that your naive look is actually very laughable? His eyes stared at her as if he was trying to see through her. Qin Chun looked back into his eyes. She was honest, but in his eyes she was extremely detestable. Very good. He chuckled and let go of her. He took a step back, his gaze still on her. He was still smiling faintly, but it was a bitter smile. Qin Chun, do you know that you have a high and mighty feeling? It's the same feeling as Rong Lei. It's like the whole world is under your feet, including me. Chapter 28:32. He looked at her and asked again, one last time, your choice? Qin Chun leaned against the door and said softly, I choose to be with Rong Lei. Maybe we'll return to New York soon. That's why you came here to break up with me, right? Lan Yu smiled coldly. It turns out that I'm not completely useless to you. At least Dr. Qin still cares about my health. He said word by word, but I already hate having sex with a woman who looks like a man. Hugging you is like hugging a piece of wood. Actually, what he said was wrong. Although her body was slender and thin, it was the most perfect he had ever seen. At this moment, he said such hurtful words just to make himself less embarrassed. Anyway, she would never care about him or his opinion. So, he said it to his heart's content and ended everything between them with words that he didn't mean. Last night, we both took what we needed. I also wanted to compare the differences between a woman and a man. There was a hint of viciousness in his voice. Thank you for letting me finally know what kind of woman I want. Qin Chen's face turned pale. She knew what she would hear if she angered him. But when he said that, she was still embarrassed to the extreme. At this moment, Huang Xia stood at the door. She took a deep breath and her eyes were quickly stained with tears. She called out to Lan Yu softly. Lan Yu asked softly, will you forgive me just this once? If possible, we'll get engaged immediately. He was talking to Huang Xia, but his eyes were on Qin Chen's face the whole time. Qin Chen's face turned even paler. Huang Xia walked in slowly. She looked up at Lan Yu and said with tears in her eyes, sure. As soon as she said that, she was kissed by Lan Yu. He hugged her and kissed her crazily. Their lips rubbed against each other as if a layer of skin had been rubbed off. Qin Chun stood there and watched them kiss. Her body was almost numb. Qin Chun, isn't this what you want? He and Huang Xia being together was actually quite good. Only then would he be able to cut off his thoughts. If something happened to her one day and she was no longer around, he wouldn't be sad. He had said those heartless words. She could feel his pain and pain. When this man was hurting her, he was also hurting himself. But Lan Yu, there will come a day when you will forget. Just like you said, there's nothing to worry about a person who's neither a man nor a woman. Qin Chun raised his head, and with a gentle smile, he said softly, congratulations to you all. She looked at Huang Xia and dropped the last bomb. Cousin Xia, I want you to always remember that the man you have is the man I have left over. Huang Xia's body froze. At this moment, Lan Yu pressed her down on the bed and kissed her even more crazily. He looked like he was about to enter the main topic. He supported himself with one hand and said coldly, get out of here. Do you want to watch us make love? He removed Huang Xia's dress very viciously. A feminine body was enough to humiliate Qin Chen. Lan Yu looked up at her and said, "You want to stay and enjoy it? Is there any difference between a man and a woman?" There was suppressed anger in his tone. Qin Chen smiled faintly and then walked out. Chapter 28:33. Lan Yu narrowed his eyes and punched the wall above him, scaring Huang Xia. She looked at his bleeding hand and swallowed hard. "Lan Yu, you can leave in a while." Lan Yu's voice was calm. "I will compensate you 20 million yuan. Also, it's impossible between us." He looked at her. "Any woman can do it, but not you." Why should he accept Qin Chen's arrangement? He didn't need to be influenced by that woman anymore. If she wanted to leave, then so be it. If she wanted to be with Rong Lei, then so be it. He didn't care about anything. Lan Yu chuckled. When did he become so ridiculous? He was like an innocent young man who kept his chastity for a woman, but in the end, she didn't care about it at all. Was it because she and Rong Lei had done it countless times, so she wanted to have a taste of freshness before leaving? Motherfucker. He pounded on the wall of the bathroom until there was a cracking sound from the bones. The result of this time's venting was that Lan Yu could no longer hold a paintbrush. His hands could only do daily life and couldn't complete fine strokes. But he didn't care. He had lost the most important thing to him. What else did he care about? Lan Yu's life began to become a little unrestrained. There were starlets and models around him, often changing one every week. In Rong Lei's villa, Qin Chen was wearing a bathrobe and lying on the recliner. He slowly put down the newspaper in his hand. Rong Lei came out of the pool and walked to her side. He looked at her and smiled. "You can still be sad?" These days, the newspaper was full of gossip about Lan Yu. Qin Chen said indifferently, "No, I just happened to see it. Nothing is right." Rong Lei smiled and took a towel to dry his hair. "You and him are not from the same world." Qin Chen looked at Rong Lei. "What about us? Are they from the same world?" "Of course." Rong Lei stroked her short hair. "Aren't we together now?" He looked at her hair and suddenly said, "Chen, let your hair grow long. I like the way you have long hair." Qin Chen's gaze was a little distant. She recalled what Lan Yu had said that day. He said that he had done enough with a man. And he was probably speaking from the bottom of his heart at that time. Who would like her like this? She looked down and smiled. "All right, I won't cut it anymore." Rong Lei's hand lifted her chin and kissed her. Qin Chen's face turned to the side, but he held it firmly. In the end, she did not avoid his kiss and accepted it. This kiss was very lingering, but it did not arouse her heart at all. Qin Chen was always calm. He did not resist, but he did not immerse himself in it either. Rong Lei finally left her lips and said hoarsely, Chen, I can wait for you, but don't let me wait too long. Okay?" Qin Chen smiled. "You have waited for so many years. Do you care about a few months?" "I care." He hugged her and let her feel his excitement. "Chen, I want you very much." Qin Chen leaned on his shoulder and said quietly, "Rong Lei, have you had anyone else?" His body froze. Qin Chen smiled silently. "Lin Cece said she had sex with you, didn't she?" Rong Lei's expression changed slightly. Last time, he fell into Lin Cece's trap, however. Lin Cece's body really fascinated men. He did not mind having sex with different women, but the one he wanted the most was still Chen. That was his dream when he was young. Chapter 28:34. After Qin Chen asked, he looked at Rong Lei, but he didn't say anything for a long time. He didn't say anything, which meant that he agreed. Qin Chen leaned back and looked at Rong Lei quietly. "How do you feel?" Rong Lei was a little embarrassed. Chen, I'm sorry. I'm just a little curious. I didn't mean to pry on you." Qin Chen smiled faintly, and then shifted his gaze away from his face. Rong Lei didn't allow her to look away. He pinched her chin and looked at her with burning eyes. "You don't feel uncomfortable?" Would you mind if I did? Qin looked down. If you cared, you wouldn't have slept with Lin Cece. Rong Lei couldn't say anything for a moment. They had such a beautiful reunion. How did it end up like this? He didn't want her to know about his dark side. But his Chen was so smart. Rong Lei squinted his eyes and Lin Cece's face flashed in his mind. That woman seduced him on purpose that night, didn't she? Just to tell Qin? He smiled faintly. It won't happen again. Qin smiled, pushed him aside and looked into the distance. Then she looked back at him. Where's Anna? You don't want to have sex with her anymore? She whispered. Rong Lei, do you have a harem in France? She had lived in France and was very familiar with the Rong family. The men in the Rong family were all noble. Most of them had several wives and concubines. Perhaps they didn't want to waste their good looks and genes. At that time, Rong Lei's side was completely clean. At that time, Qin also thought that Rong Lei wouldn't have any. Now that he was back, he had subverted the beautiful image in her heart. He had returned with the attitude of a horse. Qin smiled bitterly. What had she been doing all these years? She promised him to keep her hair long. Not for him, but because she wanted to be herself. Even if it was only for one day, she felt that it was enough. However, Rong Lei wouldn't know about this. Rong Lei was startled for a moment. Then he smiled faintly and said, If you don't like her, I won't want her anymore. He leaned over and kissed the corner of her mouth. But Qin, don't make me wait too long. I'm a normal man. Okay? Qin looked at him and suddenly said, Rong Lei, do you think you still love me? Or have you ever loved him before? How could it be so easy to love someone? She thought he was dead. But in his world, Qin, was alive and well. But he fought hand to hand with one woman after another without any pressure, and carried forward the Rong family's tradition. She was really surprised, and perhaps even pleasantly surprised. In this way, she could leave without any worries. Without love, only those hypocritical memories were left, and they were no different from strangers. Qin looked at Rong Lei and felt pain in his breathing. This man was her whole youth, and he gave her so much joy and more than 10 years of pain. However, in the end, she found that she had never understood him. To her, Rong Lei was like a dream when she was a girl, beautiful but unreal. She laughed, laughing at her obsession, and even felt that she was a little ridiculous in men's clothes. Suddenly, Qin couldn't stand her clothes, and she wanted to change them urgently. She couldn't wait for a moment. Rong Lei, I'll go back first. She got up. Rong Lei quickly grabbed her arm. Qin, are you angry? Chapter 28:35. Qin smiled. Yes, I'm a little angry, so give me some space. She looked down. I can't accept the tradition of the Rong family. I can't share a husband with someone else. She held his hand and bit her lip. I want to calm down for a few days. Rong Lei, you can deal with your own things, but don't force yourself for me. Okay. She looked up at him, her eyes watery. I hope you are happy. After Qin said that he admired his acting skills. She felt that she was a genius at acting, but even so, she still felt a little sad. She had liked him for so many years, and all those years had been fed to other women. Thinking of this, her acting became more realistic, and she directly pushed away Rong Lei's hand, looking a little angry. If she wasn't angry, Rong Lei would probably suspect her. Now that she was angry, Rong Lei felt that she was cute when she was angry. He wanted to make her stay, but he felt that there was still a long way to go. Besides, she probably couldn't accept his messy things for a while, so it was better to let her calm down. Thinking of this, Rong Lei let go of her and called Anna to arrange a car. When Anna left, her eyes fell on Qin's face for a few seconds. After she left, Qin looked at Rong Lei. Rong Lei said very politely, "This is the tradition of the Rong family. I can't change it." "You don't want to change it. It's a man's bad habit." She snorted, knowing that she had the right to be a little angry at this time. So she picked up the water and poured it over Rong Lei's head. Moreover, it was ice water. Rong Lei had never been so embarrassed, but he still tolerated her. Because she was his Chun, the little girl in his heart. He wiped his face and smiled helplessly. "Where are you going?" "Just walking around." She looked at him. "Don't let anyone follow me." With that, she walked straight outside. Of course, she didn't need the car arranged by him. She drove her own car. Ronglei looked at her back and felt that Qin-chan was a little different. He wasn't like the 24-year-old Qin-chan, but more like the 12-year-old naive. It was true that he loved Qin-chan. It was also true that he loved power. It was also true that he loved to have sex with those beautiful bodies. In this life, he could not only have Qin-chan as a woman, and his family mission did not allow him to only have children with one woman. Ronglei picked up the glass of red wine in front of him, took a sip and raised his hand. "Anna." Anna walked out of the dark and said in a low voice, "Miss Qin has left." He drove himself. "Get someone to follow her. If she meets with Lan Yu, let me know." Ronglei's voice was very calm. Anna did not leave immediately to do it, but remained standing erect. She said hesitantly, "Master, I found something about Miss Qin." Ronglei looked at her and clenched the glass. Anna stepped forward and played a video file to Ronglei. It was very dark, but from the music it should be Ganjian Bar. But he could vaguely see a man and a woman in a dark place, making love. The man's gasp and the woman's soft moan were suppressed, but there was a kind of sexual tension. And that sound was something that Ronglei couldn't ignore. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.